The silence of the penthouse was usually comforting, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the city below, but tonight it felt suffocating. Zora Vance gasped as she sat up in the darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The phantom sensation of cold metal cuffs still lingered on her wrists, and for a terrifying second, she expected to see the gray cinder blocks of the detention cell. But as her eyes adjusted, the shadows resolved into the sleek, modern lines of Kang Dae-Hyun's master bedroom. She was safe. She was wrapped in silk sheets, not scratchy wool. Yet, the fear was a cold sweat on her skin that refused to dry. She turned to the empty space beside her. The sheets were cold. Dae-Hyun was gone. She slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the marble floor, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling estate gardens. Down below, illuminated by the harsh white glow of security floodlights, she saw him. Dae-Hyun was pacing near the fountain, his posture rigid, a cigarette burning in his hand, a habit he had quit years ago. He wasn't alone. 3 men in dark trench coats stood in a semicircle around him. They weren't his usual guards. They were older, their body language aggressive and disrespectful. Zora watched as one of them stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward the tower where she slept. Dae-Hyun didn't strike him. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply stood there, absorbing the disrespect with a terrifying stillness that frightened Zora more than violence would have. She realized then that the prison gates opening hadn't ended the war. They had simply moved the battlefield to their front door. The city believes the story is over. They think the framed executive was saved by her hero CEO, and they rode off into the sunset. But in the underworld, there are no sunsets, only long nights. The Board of Elders, the shadow council that controls the Geumul Syndicate, is furious. Dae-Hyun didn't just break the law to get Zora out, he exposed their network, drained their accounts, and humiliated their allies. Now, the bill has come due. They are demanding he fix the mess or forfeit his throne. They thought Zora was just a weakness he would eventually discard, a liability to be managed. They have no idea that she is about to become the most dangerous player on the board. The prison gates opened, but the trap hasn't closed. The elders are coming for the king, but they forgot about the queen. If you are ready to see Zora stop running and start ruling, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Afroco Obsession, because the shadow war has officially begun. The automated doors whispered open, and Zora stepped inside. Her heels clicked against the marble, too loud, somehow, in all that quiet. 3 days ago this lobby had been packed. Analysts grabbing coffee, interns goofing off by reception, the usual corporate buzz. Now it felt like walking into a tomb. She headed for the turnstiles. People moved out of her way. Conversations just stopped. The ones who used to look her in the eye now studied the floor or pretended to find something fascinating on the far wall. She wasn't the chief strategist to them anymore. She was the woman Kang Dae-Hyun had torched the entire legal system for. She could practically feel their fear coming off them in waves. To them, she wasn't a survivor, she was a live wire. Say the wrong thing, look at her the wrong way, and who knows what a man like that might do. Kenji stayed close. Closer than a bodyguard should. When some junior associate practically tripped over himself to avoid her, Kenji's hand moved toward his jacket. Kenji, relax, Zora said quietly, not looking at him. I'm walking to my office, not into a firefight. The interns aren't assassins. Orders, Ms. Vance. No one gets within arm's reach. She clenched her jaw, anger simmering just below the surface. She scanned her badge. It beeped green, one tiny piece of normalcy in a world that had gone completely sideways. The elevator ride to 35 felt like it lasted an hour. When the doors opened, the cold hit her immediately. Her department, the one she'd built herself, looked frozen. She walked toward her office expecting to see her team neck-deep in quarterly reports. Instead, she found Sarah packing up files. Sarah jumped when she saw her, nearly dropping everything. Ms. Vance. Her face went pale. We weren't expecting you. Mr. Kang sent a memo. He said you were on indefinite leave. He said you needed to rest. Zora stopped. Rest? She looked through the glass walls. Her desk was empty. Her computer, gone. Someone had put a vase of white lilies where her monitors used to be. Funeral flowers. He had everything moved to the Penthouse server, Sarah said, twisting her hands together. He said the office was too exposed. He wants you working from the estate where it's safe. Heat flared in Zora's chest. Safe. That word again. Dae-Hyun was trying to wrap her in bubble wrap, tuck her away somewhere she couldn't get hurt. He'd forgotten who she was. She wasn't some fragile thing to keep behind glass. She was the one who'd built his western expansion. She was the reason the stock price had doubled. "Put the files back, Sarah." But Mr. Kang said. "I don't care what he said." Zora walked past her and dropped her purse on the empty desk. She turned around, looking at the whole department. Even Kenji took a step back. "This is my department. My floor. And I'm not going home to hide." She looked straight at Kenji. "Get my computer back. Now. I have work to do." The private tea room tucked away in the back of the exclusive lounge was cut off from everything, the kind of place where deals got made that could topple governments or build empires. But tonight, something was off. The air felt heavy, wrong. Kang Dae-Hyun sat at the head of the low table, legs crossed, looking completely at ease. But his eyes? They were sharp, cold, watching the three men across from him like he already knew what they were about to do. The Board of Elders. His father's old guard. Men who were supposed to advise him, guide the Geumul Syndicate forward. Instead, they looked like vultures waiting for him to bleed out. "You've lost us 4 billion won in 3 days, Elder Choi said, his voice rough and brittle. He slid a tablet across the table. The screen showed a graph drowning in red. The offshore accounts. The bribes. The whole network you burned to get Ms. Vance off the hook. This isn't sustainable, Dae-Hyun." Dae-Hyun didn't even glance at the tablet. He took a slow sip of tea, set the cup down with a soft click. "It was an investment," he said, voice level. "Loyalty is what keeps this organization running. I showed them we protect our own. That keeps people in line." "It keeps your ego in line," Elder Park shot back. He was younger than the others, sharper, hungrier, always had resented Dae-Hyun taking over. "You torched our entire network to save one woman. A woman who's not even family. A woman who's become a problem." Dae-Hyun's eyes slid over to Park, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Watch yourself, Park. You're talking about the co-chair of my legitimate operations. We're talking about the reason we're bleeding out." Choi slammed his hand on the table. "The Song clan is circling. They're moving into the southern districts. Our stock's tanking because investors are spooked by all the police heat." He leaned in, narrowing his eyes. "But there's a way out. A way to fix this and stabilize everything." Dae-Hyun didn't respond. Just waited. "Chairman Song has proposed a merger," Choi said, letting the words hang there. "He wants to combine our shipping routes with his distribution network. It would cover the losses overnight. Make us untouchable." Dae-Hyun actually laughed, low, humorless. "The Song clan? You want me to get in bed with those rats? They traffic women and poison. My father spent 30 years keeping them out of our territory." "Times change," Park hissed. He slid another document across the table. "A marriage contract. The deal comes with a condition. Song's daughter. She's educated, well-connected. The marriage alone wipes out your debt and locks in the alliance." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dae-Hyun stared at the paper, then back at the men sitting across from him. Men he'd kept around out of respect for his father. They weren't just asking him to make a deal. They were asking him to erase Zora. Like she was some phase he'd grow out of once he signed on the dotted line. "So this is an ultimatum," Dae-Hyun said quietly. Too quietly. "It's a lifeline," Choi corrected, his tone hardening. "Refuse the merger, and the board will call for a vote of no confidence. We'll strip you of the chairmanship. Freeze your assets. You'll have nothing left to protect that woman with." Dae-Hyun stood. Slowly. Like something waking up. He picked up the porcelain teapot, felt the heat radiating through it. "You think I'm weak because I've been patient with you," he said softly. Then he hurled the teapot at the wall next to Park's head. It exploded. Hot tea splashed across Park's suit. Porcelain shards scattered everywhere. Park jerked back, gasping. The other two went rigid, faces draining white. "There will be no merger," Dae-Hyun said, his voice low and deadly. He leaned over the table, hands planted flat, towering over them. "And there will be no vote. If you try to sell this family to the Songs, I won't fire you. I won't take you to court." He straightened his jacket, casting a shadow over all three of them. "I will hunt you. And if I find out you've already been talking to them, I'll start with whoever opened their mouth first." He turned and walked out. The door slid shut behind him with a sound like a gunshot. The elders sat there in the wreckage, trembling. The elevator panel in the penthouse foyer blinked a harsh, unforgiving red. Zora pressed the button for the lobby again, harder this time, but the result was the same. Access denied. She stared at the digital display, the blood rushing to her ears. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a mandate. "The codes have been changed, Ms. Vance," a deep voice rumbled from the living room. Zora spun around to see Kenji standing by the archway, looking apologetic but immovable. Behind him, two new guards she didn't recognize were stationed by the balcony doors, their silhouettes blocking out the city view. The penthouse, once a sanctuary of glass and light, had been transformed overnight into a high-altitude bunker. "Open it, Kenji," Zora demanded, her voice tight. "I have a meeting with the logistics team in an hour." "The meeting has been cancelled," Kang Dae-Hyun said, stepping out from his study. He looked exhausted, the sleeves of his white dress shirt rolled up to reveal the dark ink of the dragons winding around his forearms. He didn't look at her, he was reading a report on his tablet, dismissing her freedom with a swipe of his finger. "All your meetings have been moved to video conference. You aren't leaving this building until I say the streets are clear." Zora felt a snap inside her chest. She walked over to him, snatching the tablet from his hands and tossing it onto the sofa. Dae-Hyun looked up, his eyes narrowing dangerously, but Zora didn't back down. She stepped into his personal space, radiating a fury that matched his own. "I spent 3 days in a concrete box because of you," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Do not think for a second that I will let you put me in a gold-plated one." Dae-Hyun stood to his full height, towering over her. "This isn't a discussion, Zora. The elders are cornered animals. They made a move on the convoy this morning. A sniper took a shot at my lead car." He grabbed her upper arms, his grip firm, bordering on painful. "If that bullet had found you, there is no strategy that brings you back from the dead. Then let me help you kill them," Zora shouted, pulling away from his grasp. She paced the room, her mind racing faster than her heart. "You are treating this like a gang war, Dae-Hyun. You're adding guards, buying guns, locking doors. But the elders don't care about bullets. They care about money." She stopped and turned to him, her eyes sharp and analytical. "Why are they pushing for the merger with the Song clan so hard? Why now? You said the syndicate has reserves. You said we were stable." Dae-Hyun looked away, his jaw tightening. "It doesn't concern you. Everything concerns me when I'm a prisoner in my own home," Zora countered. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Desperation like this, it smells like debt. They aren't just greedy, Dae-Hyun. They're broke. Aren't they?" Dae-Hyun remained silent, the muscle in his cheek jumping. He walked to the window, staring out at the city he claimed to rule. "They made bad investments in the southern ports. They are exposed. The merger covers their tracks before the audit. Then stop trying to shoot them and let me bankrupt them," Zora implored. She reached out, touching his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "I am not a porcelain doll to be kept on a shelf, Dae-Hyun. I am your chief strategist. You fell in love with my mind, so let me use it. We are partners, or we are nothing. But I will not be your pet." Dae-Hyun looked down at her hand on his arm, then up into her defiant eyes. The wall of ice around him cracked, just a fraction. "If you step onto this board, Zora," he warned darkly, "you become a target they cannot afford to miss." "I'm already a target," she replied, her chin high. "I might as well be the one holding the gun." The makeshift office in the penthouse was a fortress of silence, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Zora's fingers against the keyboard. She had spent the last 4 hours diving into the labyrinth of shell companies that made up the syndicate's logistics division, looking for the anomaly she knew was there. Outside the heavy oak doors, she could hear the muffled footsteps of the guards patrolling the hallway. Dae-Hyun had turned his home into a vault, convinced that walls and men with guns could keep the danger at bay. Zora rubbed her temples, the glow of the monitor stinging her tired eyes. She reached for her coffee mug, her gaze momentarily drifting to the edge of the desk. She froze. Sitting squarely on the leather blotter, right next to her tablet, was a small, matte black box. It hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. She hadn't heard the door open. She hadn't seen anyone enter. Kenji was stationed right outside, and the perimeter alarm hadn't chirped. Yet, there it sat, an impossible object in a secure room. The air in the study suddenly felt thin, the temperature dropping as the reality of the intrusion settled in. If they could place a box on her desk while she was sitting right there, they could have placed a knife in her throat. Zora didn't call out. She didn't scream for the guards. A cold, steely resolve hardened in her stomach. She slowly reached out, her hand trembling slightly before she stilled it with sheer will. She lifted the lid. There was no explosion. No ticking mechanism. Inside, nestled in crushed black velvet, lay a single, vintage fountain pen, Dae-Hyun's favorite, the one he had lost months ago. Beside it was a thick card with calligraphy so elegant it looked like a wedding invitation. She picked up the card, the paper heavy and textured between her fingers. The king destroys the kingdom to save the queen. It is a romantic story, Ms. Vance, but a tragedy in reality. He is burning bridges that took generations to build. He is making enemies he cannot defeat, all to keep you warm. Zora's breath hitched as she read on, the words twisting like a knife in her gut. He will not stop until he is dead. But you can stop him. Leave him. Disappear. Let him return to the path of reason. Stay, and you become his grave. Leave, and he lives. The choice is yours. For his own good. She dropped the card as if it were burning hot. It wasn't a threat against her life, the elders were too smart for that. They knew that killing her would unleash a monster they couldn't control. This was psychological poison. They were weaponizing her love for him, targeting her deepest insecurity, the fear that she was the anchor dragging him down into the abyss. Zora looked at the pen, Dae-Hyun's pen. They had been watching them for months. They had access to his personal effects. The secure penthouse was just another cage, and the elders held the keys. A wave of nausea rolled over her, followed quickly by a surge of white-hot anger. They thought she was weak. They thought she would read this, pack a bag, and run into the night to save him like a tragic heroine in a melodrama. They had severely underestimated her. She picked up the card again, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the paper, not reading the words, but analyzing them. The ink. The texture. The specific watermark in the corner of the stationery. It was old world. Expensive. Traceable. You want me to leave? Zora whispered to the empty room, her voice trembling not with fear, but with the adrenaline of a counterattack. You just handed me the evidence I needed to destroy you. She grabbed the black box, not to throw it away, but to lock it in her drawer. They wanted her to be a martyr. Instead, she was going to be their executioner. The black box sat at the bottom of her desk drawer, locked up tight like some dirty secret she was supposed to be terrified of. But Zora's thoughts were already somewhere else entirely. The elders had screwed up. They figured fear would make her stupid, that she'd be too busy shaking in her boots to actually pay attention to what they were doing. What they didn't get about Zora Vance was that fear didn't paralyze her. It just gave her something to work with. She didn't bolt. Didn't even throw some clothes in a bag. She just opened her laptop and pulled up the terminal. Dae-Hyun had locked her out of the building itself, sure, but he'd forgotten about her admin access to the holding companies. He thought he was keeping her safe from the street violence. He had no idea the real fight was happening in spreadsheets and bank transfers. Zora started digging. She skipped right past the quarterly reports, those were basically fiction written for investors, and went straight into the raw transaction logs for the Geumul Syndicate's shell companies. She was looking for those losses Elder Choi had been screaming about when he cornered Dae-Hyun. The $4 billion one they claimed the gang war had cost them. Numbers flooded her screen, bathing her face in cold blue light. Slowly, piece by piece, the truth started coming together. And it was ugly. There is no war chest, she said out loud to her empty apartment. The money wasn't disappearing because of police raids or legal bills. It was being drained from within. Carefully. Regularly. For 5 years. Long before Zora ever walked through the doors at Kang Industries, millions were being quietly funneled out of the shipping logistics fund and sent to private offshore accounts in Macau and Switzerland. Accounts that had nothing to do with Dae-Hyun. Zora followed the money. It all led back to shell companies registered under the names of the elders' wives and kids. She let out a short, bitter laugh, not because anything was funny, but because suddenly everything made sense. The elders weren't pushing Dae-Hyun toward this merger with the Song clan to make the family stronger. They were broke. They'd been stealing from the syndicate for years to bankroll their expensive lives, and now the whole operation was a hollow shell. If Dae-Hyun ever looked at the real books, which eventually he would, they'd be finished. But if he married the Song heiress, all that fresh money coming in would hide what they'd done. Their crimes would just disappear under a wave of new cash. They didn't want her gone because she was distracting him. They wanted her gone because she was the only person around who could actually add. Zora leaned back, her mind suddenly crystal clear. That threat in the black box? It made perfect sense now. They were scared. They needed her out of the picture not to protect Dae-Hyun, but to protect themselves. These weren't powerful crime lords. They were just desperate old men trying to cover their asses. She grabbed a flash drive. Her hand didn't shake. She started copying everything, every shady transfer, every cooked book, every stolen one. The progress bar crept across her screen, filling in green. The color of their downfall. You wanted me gone for his own good, she said quietly, watching it hit 100%. She yanked out the drive and shut her laptop with a sharp click. But I think I'm going to stick around. Somebody needs to take out the garbage. Zora was done running. Now she was hunting. Comment, Queen, if you're ready to watch her burn it all down. The emergency session of the Geumul board was not a meeting, it was an execution scheduled in a calendar invite. The main conference room on the top floor of the Syndicate's secure headquarters was a cavern of glass and steel, sealed off from the rest of the building. Rain lashed against the windows, setting a grim backdrop for the three men waiting at the long table. Elder Choi sat at the head, tapping a gold pen against a leather folio. The document inside was brief, a motion of no confidence, citing Dae-Hyun's reckless endangerment of family assets as grounds for immediate removal. Do we have the votes? Elder Park asked, his voice betraying a tremor he tried to hide by adjusting his tie. He glanced at the empty chair at the far end of the table, Dae-Hyun's chair. If he walks into this room, he will not simply accept a piece of paper telling him he is fired. He will tear this room apart. Let him try, Choi replied, his eyes cold and confident. He gestured to the monitors on the wall, which showed the lobby and the elevators. We have doubled the security detail in the corridor. And the transit team is in position on the expressway. The plan is robust, Park. Either he dies on the way here, tragically caught in a rival ambush, or he arrives bloodied and violent, proving our point that he is too unstable to lead. They were banking on Dae-Hyun's nature. They knew him as a man of fire, a warrior who solved problems with his fists and his gun. They expected him to storm the building with his wolves, to scream and threaten. They were prepared for a gangster. They had prepared legal filings, police contacts, and armed mercenaries to neutralize a physical threat. They checked their watches, smiling grimly as the time approached. They believed they held all the cards. Across the city, in the silence of the penthouse, Kang Dae-Hyun slid a fresh magazine into his sidearm. The metallic click was the only sound in the room. He adjusted his shoulder holster over his white dress shirt, his face a mask of lethal concentration. The summons had come 10 minutes ago, a mandatory board meeting. He knew exactly what it was. It was a coup wrapped in bureaucracy. Kenji, Dae-Hyun said into his earpiece. Prepare the convoy. We take the armored route. If they want to take my crown, I will make them choke on it. You aren't going alone, a voice said from the doorway. Dae-Hyun turned. Zora Vance stood there, not in the casual clothes of a prisoner, but in a tailored suit of blood-red silk that fit her like armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant twist, and her eyes held a sharpness that rivaled the weapon at his hip. She didn't look like a victim recovering from trauma, she looked like a queen preparing for a coronation. Zora, stay here, Dae-Hyun commanded, his voice softening only slightly. This isn't a strategy meeting. It's a kill box. They are going to try to strip me of my title, and when I refuse, they will try to kill me. I know, Zora replied, walking toward him. She didn't hesitate. She reached out and placed her hand over the gun holstered at his side. They are expecting you to come in with guns blazing. They want you to prove them right, that you are a dangerous, uncontrollable thug who cares more about vendettas than profits. She reached into her purse and pulled out the flash drive, holding it up between them. If you walk in there and shoot them, you become a fugitive. You lose the company. You lose the legitimacy we built. Her eyes locked onto his. But if we walk in there together, if we show them that I am not your weakness, but your weapon, we don't just win the fight. We win the war. Dae-Hyun looked at the drive, then at the fierce determination in her eyes. He saw the shift. She wasn't asking for protection anymore. She was offering it. They are expecting a gangster, Dae-Hyun, Zora whispered, a dangerous smile touching her lips. Let's introduce them to the CEO. Dae-Hyun stared at her for a long beat, pride warring with his instinct to hide her away. Finally, he nodded, grabbing his suit jacket and helping her into her coat. Let's go, he said, opening the door. The elders are waiting. Rain blurred the city lights into smeared neon streaks against the Mercedes Maybach's reinforced windows. Inside, everything was quiet. Zora tugged at her blood-red jacket cuff, eyes glued to the tablet on her lap. She wasn't watching the road, she was tracking the Geumul Group's stock ticker. The numbers were all over the place. The elders were already spreading rumors about unstable leadership to spook the shareholders. 3 minutes to the expressway exit, Kenji said from up front, checking the rear view. Right on time. Then everything went sideways. A heavy black truck came roaring off the on-ramp, completely ignoring the lanes, and slammed hard into their rear escort car. The crunch of metal was muffled inside the Maybach, but Zora felt it in her teeth. The car behind them spun out, throwing sparks across the wet road like fireworks. Contact rear. Kenji yelled, hands flying across the wheel as he corrected their swerve. Dae-Hyun's arm shot across Zora's chest, pinning her back against the seat. Not out of panic, pure reflex. Zora didn't gasp or close her eyes. She just looked out the window as a second SUV pulled up next to them. The window came down. A rifle appeared. Thwip thwip thwip. Bullets slammed into the bulletproof glass inches from Zora's face. The outer layer spiderwebbed but held. White cracks bloomed across the dark tint like frozen flowers. Mercenaries, Dae-Hyun said, recognizing the gear and the sloppy spray of gunfire. They're not trying to kill us. Those are small caliber rounds. They're going for the engine. They're trying to stall us, Zora cut in, her voice sharp. She glanced at the dashboard clock. 9:55 a.m. The meeting started at 10 o'clock. If we miss the vote, the motion passes automatically. They don't need us dead. They just need us not there. Dae-Hyun looked at Kenji. Clear it. On it, Kenji said, ice-cold calm. He hit a button on the console and spoke into the comms. Wolves, pattern Delta. Burn them. The two black SUVs flanking them suddenly hit the brakes hard, tires screaming on wet asphalt. They slid sideways, forming a wall of steel across the highway and trapping the attackers behind it. Zora twisted in her seat to watch through the rear window as the mercenary trucks crashed into the blockade. The Wolves, Dae-Hyun's elite crew, jumped out, weapons up, turning the highway into a war zone. Kenji floored it. The V-12 engine roared and the Maybach shot forward, leaving the chaos, smoke, and gunfire shrinking in the rain-slicked distance. The car tore down the open highway, speedometer climbing way past anything legal. Dae-Hyun didn't look back. He slowly pulled his arm away from Zora and turned to check her face, looking for any crack in her composure. You hurt? Zora straightened her suit, hands steady. She looked at the spiderweb crack in the window, then back at him. I'm fine, she said, her voice as hard as the car around them. That was just the warm-up. The real fight's waiting upstairs. Dae-Hyun let a small, dark smile touch his lips, something almost like pride, burning hotter than adrenaline. He reached over and took her hand, kissing her knuckles without breaking eye contact. Then let's go finish it. The city skyline rose up ahead, Geumul Tower standing like a dark needle against the storm clouds. The mercenaries had failed. The ambush was over. Now only the sharks in the boardroom were left. The boardroom's heavy double doors didn't slam open. They slid apart with that soft hydraulic hiss that somehow made the whole room go quiet. Elder Choi had his hand in the air, about to call the vote, when he stopped cold. He was expecting thugs covered in blood, maybe even cops. What he got was Kang Dae-Hyun casually adjusting his tie like he'd just walked out of a coffee shop instead of a gunfight. And next to him was Zora Vance, moving like she owned every inch of ground she stepped on. That blood-red suit of hers practically glowed against the stormy gray light coming through the windows. She wasn't trailing behind Dae-Hyun either. When they reached the long mahogany table, he pulled out the head chair and stepped aside for her to sit. You could feel the shock ripple through the elders. Elder Park shot to his feet. This is a private meeting, he snapped. She doesn't have clearance. She doesn't have a title. Get her out of here, Dae-Hyun, or security will do it for you. Dae-Hyun stayed standing behind Zora's chair, one hand resting on the back like he was guarding a throne. We're here to talk about the syndicate's finances, he said, way too calm for the situation. Ms. Vance spent this morning tearing through our accounts. I'd say that makes her the only person in this room who actually knows what she's talking about. Zora didn't ask permission. She just pulled out a silver flash drive, slid it into the table's built-in port, and started typing. She looked almost bored. Sit down, Park, she said without glancing up. You're really going to want to be sitting for this. Before he could argue, the massive monitors at the end of the room blinked on. The corporate logo disappeared, replaced by this intricate web of financial records. The room went dead silent. This wasn't just numbers on a screen, it was a full map of who'd been stealing what. You told everyone the syndicate lost 4 billion won because of the war with the Song clan, Zora started, her voice cutting through the silence. She hit a key and a bunch of transactions lit up in bright red. But the war only cost 500 million. The rest didn't go to lawyers. It didn't go to bribes. She looked up and stared directly at Elder Choi. It went to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Registered under your wife's maiden name. Choi went pale. That's a lie, he stuttered, looking around desperately at the other elders. She's making this up. I don't make things up, Zora said, ice in her voice. I just find what's already there. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. A new window appeared on screen, a live banking portal. The thing about money these days is it's all just data. And I'm very good with data. What the hell are you doing? Park yelled, recognizing his private Swiss account on the screen. Taking back what you stole, Zora said, and pressed enter. Immediately, every phone on that table started buzzing and lighting up. The elders grabbed their devices and stared in horror at identical messages. Withdrawal alert. Account frozen. Transfer complete. You can't do this. Choi was practically screaming now, frantically scrolling through his phone. His account balance read 0. That's my money. That's everything. Wrong, Zora said, leaning back in the chair like she'd just won a hand of poker. It was the syndicate's money. I just put it back where it belongs. And since you broke about a dozen bylaws on embezzlement, I also froze your domestic accounts to cover the interest you owe. In under 2 minutes, these men had gone from running the underworld to broke. They turned to Dae-Hyun, practically begging, but his expression didn't budge. You wanted this merger to cover up your theft, Dae-Hyun said quietly, but every word hit hard. You were ready to sell out my family to save yourselves. Well, now you've got nothing. He glanced down at Zora, and something like pride flickered in his eyes. Motion denied. The quiet after the digital execution was crushing. Elder Choi sat there like someone had hollowed him out, like his entire life had just been yanked away through a computer screen. The other elders wouldn't even look up, their hands were shaking, all that swagger they'd carried for years just gone. They weren't crime lords anymore. They were just old men in fancy suits with nothing left. Dae-Hyun moved around the table slowly, each footstep landing like a countdown. He stopped behind Choi and leaned in close. You thought I'd shoot you, he said quietly. But a bullet's too easy. Death lets you off the hook. Being broke and powerless? That's the real punishment. He stood up straight and fixed his jacket. You've got an hour to grab your stuff and get out of this building. You're not welcome on Geumul property anymore. And if I see any of you in Seoul after dark, your families lose their protection too. He nodded toward the door. Leave. They didn't fight it. Didn't even try to plead. They just stood on wobbly legs, threw one last terrified glance at the woman in red who just obliterated them with a few keystrokes, and shuffled out. They were already ghosts before the door shut. When it clicked closed, the whole room seemed to exhale. Kenji and the wolves came in from the side, eyes wide as they scanned the empty chairs and realized what had just happened. They looked to Dae-Hyun, waiting. But Dae-Hyun wasn't looking at them. He turned to Zora. She was still sitting at the head of the table, pulling the flash drive out of the console, that post-adrenaline calm settling over her face. She met his eyes. He reached for her hand and pulled her up. Didn't let go. Then he turned to Kenji, his voice cutting through the room with total authority. Send out a press release to the legitimate businesses and a red notice to the families. Tell them the Board of Elders is done, corruption charges. He paused, looking at Zora with something intense and possessive burning in his eyes. And update the org chart. Zora's not chief strategist anymore. She's co-chair of the Geumul group. What she says goes. Her decisions are mine. Kenji bowed deeply. Understood, chairman. Or chairwoman. A jolt ran through Zora, not fear, but pure power. She wasn't behind the scenes anymore. She was right there at the top. Dae-Hyun led her to the massive window overlooking the city. The storm was clearing, revealing Seoul's sharp skyline in shades of steel and gray. From up here, the city looked different. It wasn't a war zone anymore. It was theirs. They wanted to destroy us, Dae-Hyun said, pulling her close against him. They thought you were my weakness. They got it backwards, Zora said, her hand resting over his heart. I'm your strength. He kissed her forehead, like he was sealing a promise. The shadow war was done. The traitors were out. And standing there together, framed against the city they now ruled, Zora felt it, this wasn't the ending. This was just the beginning of their reign. She didn't just survive this. She won. Share this if you love a power couple. See you in part 3.